All right. Listen, once we get over these issues, and they are just cause celebs that really don't affect our lives, but it's just the nature of, I mean, the Phillips issue is just a really good example of, it's a bit like the Polkinghorne trial, you know? There are issues that consume New Zealand, and everybody's got an opinion on it. Arthur Allen Thomas would be another one, I guess. The Christchurch civic case. They are cases that consume us for a moment, and we all have a sort of a visceral emotional reaction to, but they really aren't going to make a blind bit of difference to the way in which we live our lives. And they're far more important than prosaic things to worry about. Well, one of them is whether or not the lights stay on, just quietly. We've got through another winter. Phew. But next year, well, there's a part of the cost of living crisis, the cost of electricity that the current government's battling with, but also whether or not the lights stay on again next winter, there's an issue. And somebody who's written about this and is an expert in his own way. He is a former chief executive of Mercury Energy, a former chief executive of Fonterra, and gosh, I suspect he comes from a well-established family in this country. I'll ask him in just a second. And that is Fraser Whineray, and Fraser joins us now. Fraser, thank you for joining us. I'm going to ask the obvious question. Winston's your dad, yeah? Wilson's your dad.
Wilson's my uncle. Yeah, Wilson.
Your uncle.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you play rugby yourself?
Yeah, a little bit. My nose looks like it's been through the front row a few times, but not to any decent standard. But I certainly enjoyed it till I was about 30.
Is he still alive?
No, he passed away about a decade ago, unfortunately. But he's survived by his wife Beth.
Right, I met him in a restaurant in Wanganui where he came out to introduce himself to me 20 years ago. What a lovely man. You're a
Yeah,
lovely
yeah.
family, the
Thank you.
Winnerays.
Thank you very
Listen,
much.
but you've had a distinguished commercial career before we get to the electricity issue. How did you end up, if I might ask, as chief executive of Mercury?
Yeah, I was a chemical engineer originally. I did plenty of time in the dairy sector, then investment banking, and then worked for various Graham Hart-owned companies like New Zealand Dairy Foods, which is now getting sold by Fonterra, Carter Holt Harvey, which Graham Hart still owns parts of, and then went across to the electricity sector as head of operations there for Mighty River Power, as it was known at the time. There are two bits to it: the generation
Sure.
side, Mighty River, and the retail side, Mercury Energy. And in the end, then I got listed as the first mom company. I became the chief executive, succeeding Doug Heffernan, who'd been the CEO since 1999 when Mighty River Power was formed. And then so I was CEO for 6 years and did all the work post-listing, which including just calling the whole thing one name rather than having two names.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gin tailors have got an evil reputation at the moment. I suppose evil's probably emphasise it, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
They're perceived as part of the problem. Is that fair commentary or not, do you think?
No, I don't think it is, and I'll tell you where I'm arguing from. I don't work for any of them anymore, and I've worked on both sides of the energy system in a big way. Obviously, the bit with Mercury for a dozen years, half of which is chief executive, and the other chunk is chief operating officer of Fonterra, where I was buying a huge amount of energy across all forms in New Zealand. So I've seen both sides of this market. I've undertaken economic and rational investment and decarbonisation on both sides of the market in a major way. And so what I'm wanting to do is make sure we get the debate on the right objectives with the right problem definitions to solve for, I think, as you touched on your introduction, the trilemma, which is security of supply first, always, pricing, and then sustainability. And we seem to have got fixated by the latter, and the first two are now in significant trouble. But the gentailers, because the debate's partly focusing on gentailers, that is actually the wrong problem definition. There's some richer stuff, which I've pointed out in that Herald article,
Mm.
to lay out what the issues are in New Zealand on security and pricing, and then lay out 4 very simple recommendations for it. Because if we get the policy debate wrong and we say the problem is over there and it actually isn't over there, we'll make a change, and before you know it, as you said in your introduction, the lights could go out. And then whose fault's that going to be? That we should never have a situation in New Zealand where we're wondering about next winter. It should just not exist in a developed economy.
Oh, I agree with you, and so would all of New Zealand. And you address that, which is why we're talking to you at the moment, Fraser. In an article that was published in the New Zealand Herald last week, you say there are 4 solutions essentially to resolve, well, not so much resolve the crisis, but move towards the right policy settings. The first is winter security without question. So you're saying we should never even be asking this question of can we get through winter. It's just who's in charge of that in your view? Is that the gentailers who do seem to be with the Huntly coal storage finding a solution, or is it central government?
Ultimately, the responsibility for security of supply does sit with the government because they make the policy settings by which the market operates. And what you've seen, and just for the listeners, we have at most 10% or 5 weeks of hydro storage in New Zealand. Now, we need all of that to get through winter because in the winter time, the precipitation in the South Island is frozen and doesn't come down until spring. And so the liquid inflows going into the lakes shrink and demand goes up because we've got to heat our homes and businesses. So we need the lakes for that. The problem is before you get to having a full lake at the start of winter, we may have a shortfall of inflows which is equivalent to New Zealand's entire hydro storage. So that's 10% shortfall of electricity. Now, to fix that, you need backup, and the backup has been coming from gas historically. Now that market is in crisis, and it's been coming from Huntly with the coal. And so what you've got is a situation where everyone's saying, well, is the market working? Are the gentailers doing their bit? They're doing a heck of a lot, actually, and they're trying to sponsor Genesis into keeping coal out the back so that by January, as you're heading into an autumn, if you really need to put the handbrake on the hydro lakes, you can. But the problem is there's only 3 things that can satisfy the deep energy storage for a South Island drought. You've either got to have a very big lake, bigger lakes. So what we need is to double New Zealand's hydro storage. That's kind of like the original proposition, and I'm not suggesting this for a second, of flooding Manapuri all the way to the same height as Te Anau, which started the Save Manapuri campaign in the 70s. That would give you about 3 to 4 terawatt hours of electricity. That's how much hydro storage you actually need to deal with the South Island drought. The second one is flexible gas. Gas is not coming back anytime soon, certainly not flexible gas. We had a lot of that with the Maui system. And the third one is coal. And so now we've put all of our chips on one last thing, which is coal, out the back of Huntly on 3 40-year-old turbines, and it's on one site. And running New Zealand's energy security on one site is absolutely negligent. And it needs to be acknowledged that we need multiple sites like we enjoyed with gas and coal. So then you come to, well, why don't we build some more? I'll just cover this off. Well, you try getting some more gas. No. Try building a coal-fired power station. Not a chance. Try getting massive hydro storage in New Zealand. Not a chance. So the issue of energy security sits with successive governments, and Parliament as a whole actually has to address this in a multi-partisan way.
Okay, now, and there's your issue. In your article published in the New Zealand Herald last week, you make the point that really central government doesn't have a lot of influence over this issue. You make the exception of one, and that was the decision in 2018 around gas and oil exploration, but particularly gas. Can I ask the obvious question, Fraser? Is there gas out there that we haven't found yet and that would have been found if the government hadn't had pushed the stop button in 2018?
Yeah, I'm not the expert, and there's certainly people like Andy Knight and co from the gas co that are covered off. But my expectation is yes, there is gas to be found, and there's gas to be continually explored in fields. When you're on a gas field, it's not drill it once and then just wait for 30 years as it comes out of the ground. You have to keep on working the field, and that means mobilising expensive rigs, doing little extensions, finding new pockets because you keep on learning about what's happening underground as you go when you're harvesting a gas field. And what happens with the gas ban? Yes, there might have been some ongoing investment onshore after 2018, and some of that might not have been as successful. But what happens is when the large international players leave because they're particularly interested in offshore, then you only end up with a couple of domestic gas players, and they're not feeling the love. There's huge regulatory risk. It costs a lot of money to mobilise a rig, and so they're more in harvest mode. So what used to happen is a lot of gas would come into the electricity market well ahead of coal, and that's not happening anymore. So yes, in my
Yeah,
view,
but
more
but
gas.
that's why I'm asking the question
It
of
would
you.
have
You
been
see,
done.
when you
It
talk
would have been
about
done.
some sort of non-partisan or bipartisan approach to energy security in this country,
Yeah.
I'm looking now at the Labour energy spokesperson, the Greens spokespeople, God Te Pāti Māori, they're right out there. Um, there's no unanimity that we should have gas or coal as any part of their future, is there?